Hi, my name is Inez. Funny thing about family, you don't realize how deep the fractures go until one sharp comment splits the whole damn thing apart. And my breaking point? It came dressed in champagne, fake smiles, and a retirement cake that read, "Congratulations, Richard, a legacy of greatness." It was my father's retirement party, but it might as well have been a wake for whatever was left of our relationship. The room was filled with polite applause, highball glasses clinking, and the sound of shoes squeaking across the country club's marble floor. Everyone was there: Dad's golf buddies, former colleagues from his decades at the firm, family friends, our extended family, and of course, my younger brother Brian, basking in the usual golden spotlight that seemed reserved only for him. I stood by the window, trying to disappear into the paisley curtains. Then came his speech. "Thank you all for being here," my father began, commanding attention like a preacher at the pulpit. "This day means a lot to me, not just because I'm closing one chapter, but because I get to reflect on what I've built, a legacy of discipline, of achievement, of purpose." He paused dramatically. I sipped my wine. He looked at Brian. "My son, this kid is brilliant. Picked himself up after mistakes, found a job, a wife, and he's got 2 kids now. He's the definition of perseverance. I see myself in him. You made me proud, son." The crowd clapped. Brian grinned. I watched in silence. "And then," my father said, his tone shifting, "there's Inez." There was a rustle of polite laughter. I froze. She's always been creative, artistic, sensitive, a dreamer, you could say. Never quite understood numbers or structure or reality. But hey, the world needs poets too, right? He chuckled. So did a few others. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. That moment stretched out, like glass cracking under pressure. Something inside me splintered. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, tight-lipped, composed, like I'd been trained to since childhood. But inside, I was burning. When I was 13, I used to sit on the porch with my sketch pad, hoping he'd notice my drawings. Once, I won a regional art competition. He didn't even come to the exhibit. "That stuff won't pay your bills," he had muttered. Brian, meanwhile, got a standing ovation for showing up to his soccer game half drunk and still scoring 1 goal. I took another sip of wine, feeling the sting in my chest, trying to push down the old ache that I thought I'd buried. Later that night, as I stood alone near the patio's edge, watching the sun dip behind the golf course, Brian approached. "Don't take it personal," he said, offering me a whiskey. "You know, Dad, he's just old school." "No, Brian," I said quietly. "He's cruel, and he's been that way for years." But today was different. I saw confusion flicker across his face. I was already walking away. That night, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop instead. I went digging: emails, bank statements, financial records, passwords I wasn't supposed to know. Because if he wanted to humiliate me in public, paint me as the family flake, I'd let him see what the so-called failure had quietly learned all these years. I was never as lost as he thought. And maybe, just maybe, it was time I stopped playing their game and started rewriting the story. Inez sat in the dim light of her apartment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The glow from her laptop washed over her face, casting shadows that mirrored the ones tightening inside her chest. The silence in the room was punctuated by the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, and the quiet war happening in her memory. She typed in her father's old business email address, something he thought she never knew, and began searching. Every keystroke felt like peeling back the layers of a wound she'd never let heal. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for yet, but she knew it was there. Memory, like a parasite, burrowed deep that night. She thought back to 7th grade, science fair season. She had spent weeks building a solar-powered irrigation model, staying up late, gluing miniature pipes, testing different solar angles in the backyard. The morning of the fair, Inez stood proudly beside her display. Her classmates buzzed around. their parents fussing with cameras and words of praise. Richard had shown up 30 minutes late, still in a suit, Bluetooth headset clipped to his ear. He glanced at the model once and said, "Looks complicated. Not sure what the point is. Let's hope it at least looks impressive." That night, he toasted Brian at dinner for hitting a home run in Little League. The ping of a new email pulled Inez back to the present, an auto-forwarded thread from 7 years ago. Subject: RI, University Funds, Transfer Approval. She opened it, and her stomach tightened. Richard, as per your request, the funds previously reserved for Inez's graduate program have been transferred to the collateral account for Brian's small business loan. The date stamped on the message was the same week she'd received her university's deferral letter, when she'd been told the funding hadn't come through. She had blamed the economy, bad timing, maybe even herself, but never them. There it was, black and white. Her dreams rerouted to fuel Brian's second chance, a smoothie bar that went under in less than 8 months. She closed her eyes. The breath caught in her throat like a sob she refused to let out. Across the apartment, her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. "Dad felt bad about what he said. He was just nervous with the speech and all. Don't overthink it." It was signed with a heart emoji, like that made it okay. Inez stared at the message for a long time, her expression unmoving. She replied simply, "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just awake." 2 days passed. She returned to the emails. Her father's history archived neatly, each message a brick in the fortress he'd built to keep his image untarnished. Contracts, personal notes, internal memos from his firm. One stood out. A thread titled, "Regarding the Wilcox Fund, Redirect." This one was different. It detailed how Richard had been approached to handle a charity fund, a grant for underprivileged young artists. Inez's name came up, recommended by her high school art teacher, Mrs. Lane. Talented, humble, top of her class, one line read, but instead of forwarding her portfolio, Richard had shut it down. "We have other priorities for Inez. She's not pursuing the arts seriously. Please consider alternative candidates." And that was it. A closed door she never even knew existed. She sat back in her chair, breath shallow. He didn't just ignore her talent. He erased it. The betrayal burned hotter than before, not because she'd been overlooked, but because she had been actively denied. Her father hadn't just failed to support her. He'd chosen to keep her small. That evening, Inez called her therapist, a woman named Val she'd seen sporadically after her last breakup. "I feel like I'm choking on all these years I convinced myself I was just not good enough," Inez said, her voice hollow. Val's voice on the other end was steady. "Sometimes the hardest truth isn't that we weren't loved right. It's realizing that we were taught to love people who never saw us clearly." Inez didn't respond. She just let the words settle. "I think I need to write it out," she said finally. "Not just the memories. All of it. The facts. The pieces they tried to keep scattered." "That's the beginning of your power," Val replied. The next day, Inez drove across town to visit someone she hadn't seen in years, Mrs. Lane, her high school art teacher. The woman answered the door, her silver hair tied back, the same sharp warmth in her eyes. "Inez? My God, you look like a hurricane waiting to happen," she said with a smile. They sat on the porch, sipping chamomile tea, while cicadas buzzed in the trees. "Did you know he blocked the Wilcox Fund?" Inez asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Lane looked down, sadness creeping into her features. "I suspected," she said, "but I couldn't prove it. I'm so sorry." "He didn't just stop me," Inez whispered. "He made sure I'd never know I was even considered." Mrs. Lane reached for her hand. "You were always more powerful than they knew, and you still are." In that moment, the emotional architecture of Inez's world shifted. Her father's control had always felt monolithic, impenetrable, But it was paper-thin once she began seeing the design. This wasn't just childhood trauma. It was manufactured limitation. And she was done living inside it. Inez hadn't planned on driving out to the old house that day. But after seeing the Wilcox Fund email, something shifted. She didn't want to run from the past anymore. She wanted to stand in it, feel the full weight of it. So she took the long way upstate, through winding two-lane roads lined with maples, their leaves just beginning to turn. Early fall always had a way of lulling people into nostalgia, like it was trying to trick them into believing things were softer than they really were. She parked across from the house, not pulling into the driveway. Her parents were gone for the weekend, some golf retreat in Vermont, and the house sat quiet under the afternoon sun. The shutters were still painted that forgettable taupe her mother insisted was neutral but elegant. Nothing about that house ever felt elegant to Inez. It felt like a set piece, a stage. She didn't have a key anymore, but the back door still stuck when you pulled it just right from underneath. Inside, everything smelled the same. Lemon polish, distant mildew from the basement, the sharp tang of old leather books her father never read but kept in neat rows. She moved carefully, like the walls might wake up and start whispering memories at her. Her feet carried her to the study, Richard's private sanctuary. Inez took a slow breath and sat behind his desk, letting her hands rest on the wood surface. She pictured him there, late at night, sipping whiskey, writing emails that would reroute her life without her consent. Opening drawers, she found what she expected: receipts, letters, awards. But then, tucked inside a manila folder labeled Archive Personal, she found something she hadn't prepared for. A letter, handwritten, sealed, but never sent. The paper yellowing at the corners. She slid it out and unfolded it. Inez, if you're reading this, it means I never gave it to you, and for that, I'm sorry. There's a lot I've misunderstood about you, about what matters. You were never supposed to be like me. You weren't supposed to want what I wanted, and I didn't know how to love you for it. Your art terrified me. Not because it was bad, but because it was so good, I knew I couldn't control it. I didn't want to lose you to a world I didn't understand. So I shut it down. I tried to keep you close by shrinking your voice. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. Dad? Inez stared at the words. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed dry. She wanted to feel something: rage, grief, closure. But the only thing that came was silence. And silence was worse than pain. It was emptiness. She put the letter back. Later, in her childhood bedroom, Inez opened the old closet. Her sketchbooks were still there, dozens of them, stacked like sediment layers in a life paused too soon. She took out one, deep indigo cover, edges curled, and opened to a page of pencil studies. Eyes, hands, silhouettes. Then, between two pages, a photo fell out. Her, 10 years old, standing beside her art teacher, holding a blue ribbon and a painting of a woman curled in a chair, her face hidden behind her hair. The caption on the back, written in Inez's careful cursive: invisible, but not imaginary. She closed the book and exhaled sharply. That girl, she wasn't a ghost. She was still here. She had just been buried under someone else's expectations. That evening, as twilight spread across the sky, Inez stood outside the house again. She looked up at the windows, at the walls that raised her, shaped her, but never protected her. Her phone rang. Brian. She let it go to voicemail, but he called again. Finally, she answered. What? She said flatly. Look, I heard you stopped by. Everything okay? Define okay. A pause. Are you mad at Dad? About the speech? Inez let out a bitter laugh. Brian, the speech was just the encore. The main act happened years ago. And you? You were the golden child in a play I didn't audition for. Come on, that's not fair. No, she snapped. What's not fair is having your dreams stripped so someone else can have a second chance they never earned. Silence. I didn't know about the fund, Brian said finally, voice lower. I swear to God. Does it matter? Inez asked. You still benefited. You're still the reason they called me a disappointment. He didn't respond. I'm not blaming you for being loved, she added quietly. I'm blaming them for loving me conditionally. That landed heavier than either of them expected. Brian let out a breath. What are you going to do? Inez looked at the house one last time. I'm going to stop waiting for them to see me. I'm going to show myself. And she hung up. It had been 5 days since Inez returned from the old house. She hadn't spoken to her father. She hadn't returned her mother's calls. Brian had sent a few messages, short, awkward, as if unsure which version of his sister he was texting. None were answered. She needed the silence. But silence, like grief, has layers. Some days it wraps you like a blanket. Others, it presses down like a hand on your throat. On the 6th day, she opened her laptop and began writing. Not a journal, not a confession. It was a record. Clinical, brutal, detailed. Names, dates, documents, screenshots, emails. She gathered them all and laid them bare on a clean canvas, like forensic evidence. Not to accuse, at least not yet, but to see. To make real what had been buried under years of gaslighting and emotional fog. The more she wrote, the clearer her vision became. Her father's retirement speech hadn't just been a humiliation. It had been an exclamation mark on a decades-long sentence she never asked to serve. And now, she was done waiting for a pardon. She'd grant herself one. That night, she met with Camille, her closest friend from college, and now a quiet force in the nonprofit arts world. They hadn't seen each other in months, but Inez knew Camille would understand. They sat in the back corner of a warm, brick-walled cafe. Low lights, murmuring jazz. The scent of cardamom and roasted beans thick in the air. I'm not here to vent, Inez said, nursing a black coffee. I'm here to build something. Camille leaned in. You've got that look in your eye again. The one from sophomore year when you painted a mural on the dining hall wall at 3 a.m. and convinced them it was an installation. Inez half smiled. I want to launch an online exhibit, but not just my work. Stories from people like me, whose paths were rewritten by family, institutions, whatever. Art as reclamation. Camille blinked, impressed. You want to curate trauma into empowerment? Exactly. Give it form, a voice. And you want to use your father's platform to launch it, don't you? Inez met her eyes. Yes. A beat passed. Good, Camille said. You should. By the following week, Inez had launched a small site under a pseudonym, Redrawn. She uploaded her old artwork, pieces she hadn't shown anyone in years. The painting of the faceless woman, the solar garden concept sketch, her Wilcox Fund portfolio. And then, one anonymous post. What happens when the people who raise you are the ones who taught you to shrink? The post didn't name names. It didn't need to. The rawness of it cut clean through the noise of the internet. Within 48 hours, the site had over 10,000 hits. She hadn't expected that. The next day, she got an email from a woman named Janessa in Ohio. The subject line read, I thought I was the only one. Then another, and another. Daughters of cold fathers. Sons who were silenced. People of all ages sharing stories that mirrored hers in ways that were unsettling and comforting all at once. She read each one with reverence. But then came the email she didn't expect, from someone inside her father's former firm. You don't know me, but I read your site, and I recognized one of the pieces. It hung in Richard Halden's office, a portrait of a girl with her hands tied in red thread. He said it was something his daughter painted in high school. He took credit for inspiring it. Inez stared at the screen. He'd stolen her art, displayed it as a trophy, like some exotic object he'd discovered. That was the twist. That was the thread that pulled the whole fabric apart. It wasn't just emotional theft. It was literal, financial, professional. He didn't just erase her, he rebranded her. That night, she confronted her mother. They met at a small diner halfway between their homes. Her mother arrived in a beige cardigan, hair-pinned, pearls in place, like a woman determined to appear composed in the face of a storm. Inez didn't bother with pleasantries. "Why did you let him take credit for my work?" Her mother blinked. "I don't know what you mean." "The portrait, the red thread. It hung in his office. You knew what it meant. You knew it was mine." "Inez!" "No," she said sharply, her voice cracking, but she didn't let it fall. "Don't pretend ignorance. Not again." Her mother sighed, eyes glossy. "He said it would reflect well on the family, that clients would respond better if they thought he had a creative side. I didn't think you'd care." "You didn't think I'd care?" "I didn't want more fights. You and your father." "This isn't about fights, Mom. This is about theft, identity. You let him parade my work around like it was some artifact from a daughter he never believed in." Her mother's silence was the loudest thing in the room. Inez stood up. "He stole from me, and now I'm taking it back." That evening, Inez uploaded a new entry to RE Drawn. This time, she signed her name. "I'm not anonymous anymore. I'm Inez Halden, and this is my work, my story, my voice." The post spread like wildfire. A local reporter reached out, then a podcast host, then a gallery curator from Brooklyn who remembered the Wilcox shortlist from years ago. It was happening, not because she wanted revenge, but because she was no longer willing to be invisible. The morning after Inez publicly claimed her story, she woke to over 300 unread messages. Her inbox had become a map of strangers' pain, gratitude, and in some cases, warning. Anonymous tips trickled in. Former co-workers of her father, ex-partners, distant acquaintances from the country club circuit. Some wrote with sympathy, others with a quiet fury that mirrored her own. But what struck Inez wasn't the volume. It was the confirmation. He pressured interns to submit work under his name. He used company funds for personal travel. He said your art was a phase he cured by cutting your allowance. The mask her father wore in public was cracking, one thin, controlled smile at a time. By midweek, an article appeared in the Village Mirror, a respected regional publication. "The Quiet Daughter Who Roared, Inez Halden and the Art of Taking Back What's Yours." Camille sent her the link with a single line. "It begins." But not everyone was applauding. Later that day, Inez received a call from Brian. "You really couldn't just talk to us, huh?" he said, voice tight. "I tried, for years. There are people at Dad's firm losing their jobs over this. He's being investigated. You think you're fixing something, but all you're doing is lighting fires. Maybe it's time things burned." "You know he didn't mean to hurt you like this. He was—" "Don't," Inez cut in. "Don't defend someone who silenced me and then hung my silence on a wall like it was a masterpiece. You're turning into someone I don't recognize." "Maybe," she replied. "I'm finally becoming someone I recognize." He went quiet. The sound of his breath over the phone was the only tether between them. "I didn't ask for this, Brian, but I won't apologize for surviving it." That weekend, her mother showed up at her door. No call, no text, just a knock. Inez opened the door to find her standing there with a tote bag, looking 10 years older than she had at the diner. "I brought tea," her mother said, holding up the bag like a peace offering. Inez hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was small but warm, plants in mismatched pots, sketches pinned beside family photos she'd taken down weeks ago, but hadn't had the nerve to throw away. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the tea steeping in silence. "You've always been good at disappearing," Inez finally said. "Even when you were right in front of me." Her mother's hands trembled slightly around the mug. "I thought I was protecting you." "No, you were protecting him, and the idea of him." "I didn't think I had a choice." "You did. You just chose wrong." Tears welled in her mother's eyes. She didn't cry, but she blinked quickly, like the weight of it was stinging her from the inside out. "I read your post," she whispered. I saw the site. You're not who I thought. Inez looked at her. I was never who you thought. You just didn't look close enough. They sat in silence again, this time not in avoidance, but in the ache of honesty. I can't undo what I allowed, her mother said, but I can stand beside you now, if you'll let me. Inez stared into her tea. Then, after a long pause, she said, You don't get to walk back into this like it didn't cost me anything. I know. But you can start by telling me what else I don't know. Her mother exhaled like she'd been underwater. And then came the real twist. Inez, the Wilcox Fund? It wasn't the only thing. There was another offer. A curator in San Francisco reached out. Your high school principal forwarded your portfolio. I didn't tell you. Inez sat up straighter. Why? Because your father said no, said it was a distraction, said he'd handle it, and I wanted peace. You wanted control, Inez said quietly, and now you've lost it. The following week, Inez was contacted by a major arts podcast. They wanted to interview her, not just about her story, but about Eerie Drawn. She agreed, but under one condition. I don't want a redemption arc. I want truth. I want raw. And that's what she gave them. In the interview, she spoke not just of her family, but of the systems that rewarded men like her father, who wore polish like armor and called abuse structure. She spoke of the way silence can be inherited, like a family heirloom no one asked for. And she spoke of reclaiming not revenge, but visibility. When the episode aired, it struck a nerve. Within hours, more stories poured in. One message read, I'm not brave enough to sign my name yet, but because of you, I might be. 2 days later, Camille called. Have you seen the headlines? No, Inez said, pacing her apartment, still riding the adrenaline of her recorded truth. His firm is dropping him. Early termination. Severance blocked pending investigation. They're citing misuse of public image and ethics violations. Inez stopped in her tracks. It should have felt victorious. But what she felt instead was hollow. Like she'd been carrying a boulder for so long, she forgot what it meant to walk without the weight. That night, she lit a candle in the center of her apartment. Not for peace, but for clarity. For every version of herself she had buried to make room for someone else's comfort. She looked in the mirror and saw herself. Not small, not meek, not too sensitive. Just Inez. Seen. Whole. The fallout from the article and podcast had quieted, but the aftershocks still lingered in Inez's life. Her father's name had slipped from corporate press releases, and invitations to board positions had vanished. Her mother remained distant, not out of resentment, but from a sense of quiet exile, as if finally understanding the space between silence and guilt. Brian hadn't called again, but the absence wasn't emptiness, it was clarity. In early spring, Inez moved into a loft downtown, exposed brick, worn wooden floors, and tall windows that spilled light across the studio every morning. She used to think she needed validation to begin again. Now she knew she only needed space, and the audacity to believe she could take up that space. She started each morning with silence. No scrolling, no responding. Just canvas, charcoal, and whatever had gone unsaid in her body for too long. Some days the art came in bursts, angry lines, abstract faces, twisted figures. Other days she painted stillness, an empty chair by a window, a half-full cup of coffee. But every piece had one thing in common. There was no red thread. Not anymore. The RE Drawn platform had grown beyond anything she imagined. Camille now led a small team of contributors, curating stories, voices, even exhibitions. What began as reclamation had become a movement, but Inez stepped back. Not from the cause, but from being its symbol. She didn't need to be the face of pain to justify her presence in the world. She wanted to live. One rainy afternoon, she received a letter in the mail, postmarked from a quiet town in Colorado. There was no return address, just neat handwriting. I saw your interview. You probably don't remember me, but I was in your AP Art History class. You let me borrow your book when I couldn't afford one. You told me my sketch of the cathedral arches was fluid. That word stayed with me. I'm a designer now. You were already an artist, even when no one gave you permission to be. Thank you. Inez sat with the letter in her lap for a long time. It was a soft kind of victory, the kind that didn't need applause. Later that night, she pinned the letter on her studio wall beside a new painting. This one was simple: a woman walking through a burned forest, barefoot, her head high. The trees were ash and shadow, but the sky, in contrast, was alive with light. 3 weeks later, Camille invited Inez to speak at a small artist roundtable. Not a keynote, just a seat at the table. Inez hesitated. I don't know if I'm the right person anymore, she said. Camille smiled. That's exactly why you are. At the event, Inez listened more than she spoke. Young artists shared stories of fractured families, lost grants, cultural shame, self-doubt disguised as humility. She didn't offer advice. She offered presence. She asked questions. She encouraged pauses. And when someone finally asked, "How did you find the courage to make your voice public?" she answered, I stopped waiting for the right version of myself to arrive, the one who's polished and whole. I realized even my broken pieces could build something. There was silence afterward. Then someone whispered, That's the first thing that's made sense to me in weeks. One evening, Inez walked along the Hudson, a soft breeze curling off the water. She passed a small art supply store, closed for the night, but in the window was a sign. Looking for part-time instructors, people who remember what it feels like to start. She smiled, not because she needed the job, but because she understood the sign. That night she applied, not as an escape, but as a seed. Spring had settled fully into the city by the time the gallery show opened. Not a grand affair, not the glitz of white wine and velvet ropes, but a modest space in a community art center off Canal Street. The walls bore color, but not just from Inez. There were dozens of contributors now, students, survivors, first-timers, who had, through RE Drawn, found the courage to put their pain into pigment. Inez stood near the back, not as curator or centerpiece, just present, watching a woman in her 60s linger in front of a small painting of a girl with hands tucked behind her back, eyes closed, lips sewn shut with thread. The woman whispered to her friend, That was me. Once. This, Inez thought, was what reclamation looked like. Not shouting into the void, but whispering into the hearts of those who needed it most. A few days after the show, she received a package in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Controlled. Heavy strokes. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small envelope and a single Polaroid. Her father, sitting on the porch of a lake house she didn't recognize. He was alone, older than she remembered. No caption, no note. In the envelope was a folded piece of notepaper. I watched your interview, the full one. I knew some of it. I didn't know all of it. That's not an excuse. There's a part of me that still believes what I did was justified. I don't know if that part will ever die. But there's also a part that wants to know if you ever painted that girl again. The one in the chair. The one with her face hidden. Maybe you did. Maybe she stood up. Richard. Inez read it once. Then again. The bitterness didn't return. Neither did pity. She placed the photo on her studio shelf. Not framed, just there. A reminder of where the silence had lived. Then she sat at her easel and began a new piece. The girl in the chair was there again, but this time her hair was tied back. Her face visible, her eyes direct. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't afraid either. And behind her, a wall covered in thread. Not binding, just hanging, cut, loose. Weeks later, she stood before a group of students at the art school where she'd begun teaching part-time. One raised his hand. Do you think it ever really gets better? He asked. Inez tilted her head thoughtfully. I think we stop waiting for better, she said, and we start building different. He nodded, not fully understanding, but she saw in his eyes the beginning of it. Another student asked, "What if your family never accepts who you are?" Inez smiled gently. "Then you accept that you don't need them to." She let the silence sit. Then she added, "We spend so long asking others to see us, but the real turning point is when we finally choose to see ourselves, without apology." That evening, back in her studio, she recorded a short video for the RE-Drawn platform. She looked straight into the camera, not performing, not posing, just being. "I used to think healing meant closure. Now I know it means continuation. It means knowing some people will never apologize and still finding a way to move without dragging their absence behind you. You're not broken for wanting more. You're not selfish for stepping away. You're not alone, even when it feels like it. If any part of this sounds like your story, I just want to say, I see you. Keep drawing." She closed the laptop, exhaled slowly. And then, as the city pulsed outside, Inez turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and slept deeper than she had in years. No need to keep watch anymore. The past had spoken. The present was hers. And the future? Still blank. But this time, she had the brush. To anyone who's ever felt unseen, you're not. What I've learned is this: healing isn't loud. It's not always heroic. Sometimes, it's just quietly deciding you're done apologizing for taking up space. I used to think my worth came from being seen by others, but real peace came when I finally saw myself and stayed. If you've ever had to rebuild from the ground up, if you've ever been told who you are wasn't enough, I hope my story reminded you that it's okay to walk away. Not from love, but from conditions disguised as love. What about you? Have you ever chosen yourself, even when it hurt? I'd love to hear where you're from and how this story made you feel. Or if it didn't, tell me why. Let's talk in the comments. If this video touched something in you, please like and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories coming, and I'd be honored to share them with you.